Christopher, first of all, and thank you for organizing this event today for submitting synopsis in time. Thank you to Chase and Ariadna once more for being here today, for being part of the committee. Thank you for all of you to be here, and I guess also being there for Christopher in the past couple of years. So how will this proceed today? We will have 20 minutes time for the presentation by Christopher, where he will give us a little overview of the findings of his dissertation, and then we will have another 40 minutes for Q&A. This means that it will be Chase, Ariadna, and myself asking questions predominantly, but also everybody else in the room is welcome to ask questions as well. And this part of the dissertation should be not more than 40 minutes, so we should try to stick with that. Then I have to ask all of you to leave the room, and the committee members will debate on the grade for the disputation and for the overall grade for the dissertation together. That will take a couple of times because we have to do some work to arrive at the final grading, and then we come back to the room, and then I guess we have some time later on to celebrate Christopher. Please, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you everybody for coming. Giving me the second one. Yes. Can you see the presentation all right, Jason? Yeah, okay. Yes, I all right, so today I'm going to present the main outcomes of my thesis with the somewhat unwieldy title, The American Media Discourse on PMSTs Following the New Software Incident, where PMSTs are private military companies, private military security companies. And I'm going to start by outlining the principal objectives of my thesis, of which there were two. First, I had empirical objectives, and second, I had methodological objectives. And from that, it will also be pretty clear that there's quite a lot of ground to be covered, which I will not be able to do, of course, in those 20 minutes. So many things I'll not only go to only scratch the surface and maybe only like slightly paddle the surface of what I did, but that'll have to suffice. So empirically, my objective was to investigate the conditions of possibility of PMSTs. What that means is that I was interested in the, let's say, how they emerged, the critique exists, and which political processes were able to sustain them, even though briefly there are a plethora of reasons to assume that private military companies are problematic. Wrong window. I did this by a discourse analysis, focusing on the dislocating moment of the Niso Square incident, which I'll cover in a moment. And I'm going to use the Essex School of Discourse and the logic approach to do this. Well, did. Methodologically, my goal was to contribute to and advance the systematic use of post-structural approaches in international relations. And wanted to discuss IR discussions with more recent changes or other theories that have emerged in discourse theory or social theory more generally, and open them up for use in IR. And for that, I developed a framework of inquiry to make this all possible. I'm going to progress now. So, in a moment, I'm just briefly going to outline some introductory things that would just have to stake some holes in the ground. I'm going to talk about the logics approach, and then I'm going to show little bits of my empirical analysis by going through each of the three autonomous logics within the logic approach. There's being social logics, political logics, mathematical logics, and then I'll sum up the achievements of the thesis. So now let's come to the introductory context. And let's situate PMSTs, and we can do this very, very briefly and broadly by looking at this man, whom we all know as Max Weber, and he very famously said that a state is a human community that successfully claims the monopoly of legitimate use of force within a given territory. In international relations, we are of course not only dealing with domestic issues, and we must admit that this, in many ways, also means that states claim a little bit of monopoly of violence abroad as well, meaning that only states are allowed to commit violence abroad, and their citizens are not only allowed to do this without the consent. So it's pretty clear that the idea of companies being potentially able to do these things, and perhaps even being able to carry out a foreign policy of their own, is a very severe shift away from this foundational, let's say, myth, maybe, of understanding of states. Now, I'm not going to have time to talk about all the foundational ontological concepts of my thesis, but I think I should briefly say what I mean by discourse, since I'm going to talk about discourse analysis. I define discourse as a quasi-structured relational acts of signification, and taken together, they constitute distortion. So this means that in a discourse analysis, we are dealing with analyzing how meaning is made. And in that way, it's important to realize that elements within a discourse, so meaningful elements, can be arranged in relations of difference and equivalence. And since there is no inherent necessity as to do this, discourse is radically. It also means that a discourse is quite unstable and needs to do a couple of things to temporarily stabilize itself, which I'm not going to go into it now for time reasons, although it's actually fairly important. Now, let me briefly introduce the Niso Square incident, which was an incident in 2007 in which the employees analyzing why the absorption of counter-hegemonies were possible and why the managerial logic prevailed. First, the social logic of government and PLCs are seen as tools and as things that are inherently fixable, something that governments can use, and something that governments also rely on because them being different from government is an important part of a government's own identity. The second part is that these managerial fixes are able to promise potential fixes to a lot of other issues that were argued for in focus, simply because they're pretty vague, and we can maybe more formally say that they're very substantive, in the sense that lots of other demands can be subsumed other managerial demands, simply by saying that if we vet PLCs more, if we oversee them better, if we have legal schemes in place to make sure that they're punished when the time comes and when it's necessary, then we overcome the culture of impunity, and therefore you too can be happy enough. And the last reason being that this parallel anti-Bush hegemony was quite stable and it was looking for reasons that I haven't quite touched upon here. And that basically meant that the overall level of contestation about this was not really as much as it could have been. And in fact, this hegemony did more to actually engage in the struggle there, maybe a different outcome would have achieved. All right, I'm going to sum up the main achievements of my thesis. Empirically, I was able to show that there is a logic of passivity and inferiority attached to guards that CPM is similar to ordinary security guards that might, for instance, guard a museum, even though we know that the realities are not necessarily and very frequently not like that. Secondly, a number of subjects in this who were affected by this dislocating moment did actually not see it as such, and therefore did not participate in political contestation. These are, in my opinion, the two primary factors why the dislocation was able to be dealt with in a managerial and absorbing fashion. Methodologically, I was able to bridge the abstract logics into concrete concepts that are amenable to other techniques. I was able to incorporate techniques from corpus linguistics to show that these can also be used in discourse analysis, particularly, for instance, because it greatly enhances the immersion of the researcher into the topic which gives a lot more force to articulation and interpretation. And lastly, this is something that I did not mention here for time reasons. I engaged with and introduced the concept of heterogeneity into the logics approach, which so far hadn't really been done. Well, I guess that's what power basically working on is more or less parallel, I guess. Yeah. That's it. My time's up, and thank you for listening. And now it's time to roast again. We're going to tackle the second microphone.
3 years of work for that. Be careful, these things, just in case.
Okay, thank you very much, Christopher, for this very insightful overview of your very, very rich thesis. I would like to give the floor first to Jason for the first set of questions.
Well, hello everyone. I just wanted to say just at the outset that the microphone I don't think is, at least for me, I don't know how it is for Ariadna, but I found it quite a bit broken, so I couldn't quite hear, but I did hear my name, so I think that means that I should say something. Well, let me just say to begin with, and I have already mentioned this in my written report, but I just wanted to make it, public, suppose, in some ways, that how much I enjoyed reading the thesis and learning from it. I mean, it is an incredibly ambitious thesis that makes quite a substantial contribution to our studies, to the PMCS studies in particular, and post-structuralist critical theory and the logical approach. And I really do value the input and the reflections and the bridging concepts that you have come up with, Chris, in thinking about the logics approach more generally. It's very well written, deeply self-reflexive, at all levels. And so I do think it's a remarkable piece of work, and I do look forward to seeing its forthcoming publication. So, the bite is not supposed to be, an ominous kind of. It's not supposed to be a prelude to roasting in that sense. I think what is very interesting about the dissertation is that it is very productive. I think that the productive value of it really resides in its capacity to provoke lots of very interesting questions. At least it did for me. And I'm going to basically restrict myself to three. I've been told to restrict myself to 3 questions, so I'm going to do that now. And then I'm obviously happy to spend, to have a follow-up discussion in more detail to send you my other reflections later, Chris. So these 3 questions are one about theory, not theory, but more about explanation. One about narrative and one about critique. And in some sense, there are questions which are really questions for greater elaboration at one point, to further reflections, to future research, and so on and so forth. But also to give you an opportunity to elaborate in more detail on some of the issues that you touched on in your presentation, which was a great presentation, but didn't get to elaborate on in so much detail. For example, the logics of heterogeneity. So that might be one thing that I'm going to touch on. So my proposal is that I just say, I'm going to put the 3 questions out there, and then I'll come back and repeat them if need be. Okay, so one is about explanation, and it's really trying to target something material that they're offering us, and how you think about the logics, the social political and dynamic logics. So, for example, that mentality literature, which you do mention in the dissertation, does point to the centrality and the dominance of market logics. In thinking about PMCSs, their existence, their legitimation, and so on and so forth. So, the very simple question, well, simple, it's sort of, what role does the market play in your own framework, in your own explanatory manner, right? So, does it function as a political or social logic, as a phantasmatic logic? How does it connect up to the logics that you focused on yourself, right? So that's the kind of the first question. Right? So it's more of an explanatory question, an opportunity really to develop some of your understandings of the logics. So I can come back to repeat that in a moment. I'm just going to get all the questions out. Okay, so that is the more explanatory kind of part. The other one is one about method, and really trying to draw out a bit more this aspect, this contribution that they're making around the polygeneity, heterogeneity there, right? And especially this contrast with the equivalence difference, right? So, and a bit like the first question, I guess I think it may be useful to connect it to the empirical world. So maybe it's a kind of way of summarizing perhaps some aspects of your empirical findings. So what aspects of those empirical findings connect up to the logics of uniformity. So there's the logics of uniformity versus the logics of antagonism, and then you've got these pairs of heterogeneity, homogeneity on the one hand, and equivalence and difference. So how are they drawn into, how do you rely on them in offering your explanatory account, and how you manage to insist on the difference between those two pairs? That's the method question. And finally, a question about critique. It seems that in some parts of this dissertation, I get the impression that what you call the why question, why the MSCs were retained, is addressed through psychoanalysis and fantasy, largely. And so, one way you talk about critical implications of your findings is to suggest that one needs to break. As at the end of your presentation, you said, well, it would be quite interesting to see what the outcome would have been had the grip or the hold of the anti-Bush fantasy being in some ways disrupted sufficiently by a more active contestation of the role of the MSCs, right? And so my question there is, how far are you going to push that? In other words, how far are you going to push the critical aspects, your critique of the way things unfolded? How far are you going to push the psychoanalytic, phantasmatic dimension of that critique? And how you find other dimensions potentially relevant in thinking about both the account and the critique. I'm thinking of things like, for example, broader structural civil society cultural conditions for something else that might have taken place. You know, the logics, the structures of the political economy of the media, for example. And I know you touched on it briefly at some points, but I got the impression that there was a tension there between those broader logics and structures that are taking place that allowed the events to unfold the way they did, and this other psychic dimension, let's put it that way, that forms part of your account. So those are the three. One is to do with the logics, something that people has very much something about the explanatory account. The other one has to do with your contribution around homogeneity and heterogeneity, and its contrast with equivalence and difference. That's the one of the methodological aspect. And then finally, this critical dimension.
Okay, let's see. I think some of these questions will probably require quite a lot of experience, so I'll maybe not go to super much at first, please. When it comes to your first question, I do think that in retrospect, I probably should have flagged the role of market logics more. So the idea of entrenched market logics is, let's say, already pretty established within the research on the commodification of security or private security. So, in that sense, to me, it's a social logic that works in the background, for one, in the sense that, for instance, in the quadrennial defense planning of 2001, actually, I have the Defense Department postulated that the DoD should not do anything that could potentially contradict itself. So, in that sense, there's just an inherent and accepted belief that the market can deliver better solutions if the market offers. The interesting thing here is that I thought, for various reasons, that this would probably also come under contestation, because this dislocation should be a prime time to think about whether this actually achieves what one would want a military to do. But on the contrary, that was actually never really done. And in particular, there was this weird ambiguity and a contradiction between the government actors saying that prominent companies are not as good as we are, and that's exactly why we need them. In the sense that we can do important, real jobs, and they can do, well, other things, but they're also important. So there's this trying to square the circle argument in their articulations there. And I do think in that sense, the tool aspect of it, the logic of guarding fits into a greater logic of market perhaps, because I think that there is, the more and more I think about it, about my research, I also come to the conclusion that there seems to be some kind of fantasy about control in play, in the sense that government actors seem to think that they're still in control, even though they are part of larger governance networks, and should therefore anticipate that the other actors in this network are also subjects that contribute to, let's say, advancing the discourse. So we could maybe a bit more conventional to say that there obviously are some kind of principal agent problems here. And we can think about, like, to what extent do government agencies not realize that the primacy of the state is going to either be undermined or at least change is shaped tremendously in such arrangements. Those arrangements being governments or the marketplace. That's of course also something that I mentioned briefly in my thesis when I talked about the mentality aspect, that there is some kind of mutual reinforcement, and that everybody in this governmentality aspect is changes the outcome of this. So that leads me to think that I have probably also not sufficiently pointed out the phantasmatic aspects of market. So it could probably also be something about that. But I will admit that I probably have to think about it a little more as well. Then a question about heterogeneity and homogeneity. I'll be, when it comes to my empirical analysis, I'll be blunt and say that I'm pretty disappointed how little I was able to use this concept. So I did not find that there were lots of, it was not really a state to say that we have elements here that do not really fit in. I thought that perhaps there's contrast between what I call uniformity and logical patterns that could be used to establish that private military companies do not fit into any discursive arrangement. But this was never really discussed. So what I am taking away from this is that maybe my theoretical initiative was more complex than it need to be, and maybe we can establish similar aspects of these thoughts. Maybe a simplistic version of saying that certain elements do not belong here, with other articulation types that are not necessarily it's big, and therefore we cannot make the repertoire of signifying logics overly complex. And the second one is that, empirically, I think that also on the other hand, think that it's remarkable these logics are not found there, because it would have been a very good way of establishing the contradictory nature of non-fit between using premises and at the same time pretending like they're just mere tools in getting control. And your last question about critique. The problem that I had with that I got to listen handle in my thesis is that I did not want to open up a long-winded discussion of the outcomes and effects that the global warming has had on American society. Because I think a lot of this phantasmatically found idea that everything is terrible and once George W. Bush is replaced, everything will be better. It has of course to be seen in the context of lots of social logics and previous contestations that I didn't cover with my whole list, and I didn't want to open up yet another frontier there. I do want to think that one of the aspects that came through in this, but also probably critique, is the role that the media played in this was pretty weird in the sense that I don't think that it necessarily educated the public very well on what happened in the Union Squares in that place at stage. It's basically what we have here, like a gathering of facts that what happened and statements by the government. But I don't know, when we look at the media and the traditional liberals understanding what they serve, I'd say that in this case, they didn't do a particularly good job. But that maybe goes into quite a different direction. for discuss it. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Christopher Ayala, would you like to pose some questions?
Yes, with pleasure. So first, congratulations, I think that was really very good, very complex, but also very kind of interesting to read thesis. So it's taken a while, but you at least kind of showed really like a depth of both kind of theory and proof that is really quite impressive. I had three main questions. The first one is that, of course, you've gone into a lot of depth, right? And this is, of course, makes sense with the type of analysis that you do, but it's also very specific historical context, point in time, and this of course, is perfectly logic with this kind of theoretical framework. My question is, however, I'm not trying to say that what we can generalize from it, but at least whether we can transfer some of the findings to other settings or maybe to also more recent evolution. So what does it tell us also about this type of companies, this type of actors with these PMSCs, maybe nowadays, right? And we see also that they continue to be important, they continue to be in the media, take all these discussions about Wagner and so on, right? So what can we maybe learn also from nowadays, or how has maybe this discussion continued beyond 2010, right? And beyond certain very specific context of like US politics and the Iran war. So this is one point. The second one is about agency. So I'm really, and maybe it's because it comes from kind of a type of discourse analysis, a slightly different perspective and more big traits and so on, but I miss the agency in all of this, right? So it's your question about why, it's in the end about, this type of like, it's what Jason was saying now, right? It's very much about psychoanalysis, about these kind of fantasies. But why are some fantasies more powerful than others? Why are they more underrated than others? Right? And for me, here the role of actors, right? So who speaks and who is more authoritative to speak? Who has more power to speak? Who has a kind of a national voice? Who is heard and who is not heard so much? The positionality of actors, right? So are they strategic in the way that they reshape discourse, right? In the way that they build these fantasies. For me, it's kind of very much missing, right? And even when you were speaking now, you were speaking about they antagonize or that they speak about guards in a kind of objectivized way, that they can always speak about them in a passive voice. But it's like, who is they in that sense, right? So, and that kind of goes back to this question of whether this is also another part of the story and another potential alternative explanation beyond this psychoanalysis. And the third question it's about methods, and I mean the fact that of course you've limited your analysis very much to media analysis. And to what extent also this shapes your findings, right? So also because media analysis speaks to a certain audience, right? While, I don't know, if you were analyzing parliamentary debates or press releases or official documents, maybe you could then find different stories or different ways of speaking about these companies. And just out of curiosity also, because they also kind of in the end reflect about the use of corpus linguistics and so on, whether you think that there might be now other methods that could be useful to do the similar analysis of the in a more efficient way. I mean, there's now a lot about text analysis, machine learning, right? So I'm not the expert, but I know kind of large language models as well. So whether you can think that maybe now these kind of newer methods would bring something to it. Thank you.
I'm going to start answering the last question because I think I can give a relatively straightforward answer to that. And that is, there have been other attempts at using similar or more advanced methods. Ones like I know of certain number of studies that have used topic modeling. And I must say that in general, I'm ambiguous about this because now having carried out this analysis this day, I find that on some of the simplicity of it, of not relying on some kind of algorithm and more advanced techniques, is in some ways also an advantage. I find that in a way, we are still doing similar things we were doing in normal qualitative analysis. We're just doing it in a maybe a quicker way and looking at, it's more maybe like a compass to show us where to go, and it has its own problems, of course. But one of the advantages I find in this kind of analysis where you do collocation analysis, you can always look at the actual texts where they occur and see what is actually being said. And then go beyond the numbers. Now, we can of course do that with other techniques too, but I fear that when we do that, there's going to be a lot of pressure put on a researcher to justify the fit and compatibility with using such methods and just epistemology approach. And I do think that this could all be solved, of course, but so far I don't know. I find that the prospects of people who are so well invested in these very complex theories and in qualitative analysis, then having to learn all of these other things and pairing with somebody which could probably help them come up with software or algorithms that are more tailored towards their needs, or I honestly think very slim, even though it's possible. So at the moment, from what I know of the landscape, I think that speaking to someone simple like this is probably for now better, even though there is certainly some potential there. And for that matter, I also think that in many other studies, we can probably trim down a lot of the complexity that I had introduced in my analysis, because I was faced with this some of the silly problem that I didn't know what private companies actually going to be called in intermediate skills. Often you have kind of a pretty good idea what you're looking for and what the key subject positions are going to be, and then you can probably skip over to the collocation methods right away or do a lot less preparatory. And that would probably also make a lot of the overhead is actually less. Let's go on to your short course of media analysis. No, actually, let's think about it a little more. So let's talk about application in other areas. I think that to answer this question, I think I need to highlight again by its very nature, a logic purports to say something more than about the JMOL case, right? Because it is, in the end, something that is supposed to be also used out of context. So what I think particularly fruitful in this context are maybe two things. I think the idea of using private companies in a passive way is really quite applicable in lots of problems that we deal with in terms of governance. We can also then ask the question to what extent, what do, for instance, governments see NGOs in such matters and do not realize that the power structures they're embedded in are more complex than we just ask us to to NGOs in Nigeria. In particular, because so if you look at the government literature in general, there's definitely the problematic aspect of PMSDs in particular stems from them shaping let's say maybe in a word used by they shape the perception of security and therefore create the demand for their own services by being security experts. Now, of course, the economies very often in, for instance, in human rights and years, etc., this is actually something that we not particularly want because the kind of however, now what I think this the logic that I found here may suggest is that there is still a kind of understanding on the behalf of governments that they're wanting freedom of the price, but they still not very much control. I wonder to what extent we do actually then find this in such constellations. Let's talk about your goals. Question pages. Now, I know that Monica probably has similar questions about this, and I would probably not convince you, but this is not necessarily my goal. Let me just say why, from my perspective, this problem is not as pressing, although I do acknowledge that maybe the question of discursive power is something to discuss. Now, maybe as a primer, I need to say that since in this approach, we see subjects basically as thrown into the social and always being endowed with subject positions. They're basically just bias in discourse. So that I know this is probably not very exotic thinking to you, although probably coming in from this angle. But so here the idea is that when actors act, they do so according to the subject positions that they've taken up. And every subject position has certain requirements in discourse. And they have these requirements because of the surrounding discourse. And subjects want to fulfill these requirements because it is a way of dealing with ontological insecurity. So what this means then is that when from my perspective, enables talking about subjects in a way that many people will probably think of as too structural and deterministic. But from my perspective, isn't, because the very structure that we're talking about here only exists because subjects reenact it constantly. So a subject position seems to exist when actors do not fill it out. And I mean, from that perspective, also I'd like to say that and probably also in something you can have issue with, it's that the idea that we don't use the word actor for a reason, because that actor, the term always implies some kind of externality or Cartesian externality to independent acting that is not necessarily the case. In the sense that an actor, if we look at what an actor means, an actor is somebody that basically pretends to be somebody else. So that wouldn't mean that subjectivity is about putting on a hat and then fulfilling that role. Whereas the subject position basically underlines that subjects have pressure to do something and identifying with them because the subject, the discourse already from the get-go forces that on. So, what is the agency problem here of who refers to PMCs as, or guards as tools? Well, basically everybody. Because because there's no contestation about it, there is just the knowledge of what God is circulates in the discourse, and it is just something that others can just pick up by being part of the discourse. Now, the question that I think that's an important area that you mentioned is, yes, but certain subject positions are more powerful than others. And I said, yes, but the reason why that is because it is normalized that these subject positions have certain power. So in that sense, the subject positions there's certain social logics attached, institutionalized things that are power, so they are not being questioned. And really what was particularly pertinent here in this case is that when we look at why the managerial solutions were more successful, you could of course argue, well, yes, of course, because they were proposed by government agencies who handle more powerful than other people that took place in the media discourse. And while that's true, but that's really only part of the picture in my mind, because there were also lots of other similar, strong subject positions that did not question this either. For instance, the opposition, which were really tremendous, or very detrimentally, anyway, you know what I mean, opposed to using PMSCs at that point, also introduced legislation to deal with. They didn't question whether PMSCs should be used in general. They introduced legislation to deal with them. So in that sense, I don't remember. Sorry, I should have said time. So I'll stop there so that you also can ask a question. Shortcomings of media analysis. Yes, I think one of the particular shortcomings of media analysis is, and I think that's something that is probably particularly pertinent in our eyes, that lots of important things that go on in foreign policy are not necessarily something that is discussed in public, and while the public is not necessarily very knowledgeable. I do think that is an inherent shortcoming of my analysis, and also something that I at times thought about solving by incorporating other source materials, which I basically in the end cut simply because I didn't want the scope to go even further. I do agree that we should probably do similar analysis with regards to the similar aspects with other corpuses too, if we do that. I don't think I answered every aspect of your questions, but we should probably still go on for now.
Yeah, so now we have a problem that it's 12, and we should actually stop now. I haven't even started asking questions, which is, however, not that much of a problem, because I think we covered basically most of the points already that I had on my list about agency, about the transfer of findings to other issue areas, about, not really alternative explanations, but about other processes, other structures that could be helpful to look into when trying to explain the outcome. So in the interest of time, I don't want to go into that just for the second time, especially because you already provided us with that. Maybe one question from my side, and then we open it up, and then we have a final chance to respond to all the remaining questions. And my question would be about practical implications for research, because you say, well, one of my key contributions should also be to do this so that others who come after me can actually use this. And I think this is actually one of the really key contributions beyond just the content of your dissertation, because we have not had that before, and it's badly needed. However, it was very, very much work. You had to invest a lot of time to do that. So how can you square the circle? So how could you give something to someone else and say, okay, let's do that, and you can do that within 3 years. So there could be detours that you couldn't take because you were the first one. And yeah, how could you? What were the key points another researcher has to really consider to be able to apply this fruitfully to another issue area? And maybe also, I mean, we talked so much about what else could be done, maybe also when combining this with looking at other types of data, maybe not just text, but also other non-text discursive practices. Okay, are there any other questions for Christopher? No. Okay, Christopher.
So maybe to phrase my answer here is that I think one of the key problems that post-structural analysis have is that when you want to learn them, you cannot just open a textbook, read about others, and then say, yes, this is exactly how I want it. There's a reason for that, in that you always need to adapt the vast categories that these theories have to your needs, of course. But I do think that it is good to have some kind of skeleton in the starting point. And I want to make highlight two aspects there. I have, over the years, found that very many other emerging or young researchers in IR who do want to use post-structuralism everybody has read this one book by Lenny Hansen, Purely as a Practice, because she basically does that there. She does it very well from that perspective. And then I also think that the logics approach is very valuable in general because we have kind of it steers our attention to certain aspects that we should do. And I think that the value in my work now is that we have set up this kind of skeleton or bridging concepts that helps maybe, also it's maybe a new compass. And I think that's probably very likely, even when other researchers have to adapt them and say, well, in my case, I don't find that aspect very convincing. I want to investigate social logic in a different way. They can start there and have some already ordered set of things to do. Even if you wanted to make a very simple flow chart to here, this is sequentially what you do. Be aware that you won't actually do it sequentially, but it does help in the beginning to think of it as something circular as a sequence. What I also think is that whenever we talk about, or I do think another great contribution that the logics approach has made is the idea that we can integrate methods and techniques, even theories from other areas, as long as we adapt them. So I do hope that my adaptation of corpus linguistics, when it can be simplified or immersed more perhaps, is a good way of dealing with immersion problems that we might sometimes encounter. Let me say what I mean by that. Is that one of the important or problematic aspects of interpretive research is that we at some point need to make a judgment and say, this could be interpreted that way, and this corresponds to my categories in this that way. But I found that it is that is sort of simple on some level, but it's also very daunting, because you want to be really sure that what you interpret that way is in some sense correct. And in order to do that, you need to be really deeply immersed into the subject. And I found that as strange as corpus linguistics is in some ways too, it does really help with that. It does have inherent problems, namely that it does more or less lock you into one corpus of source materials, and it does get kind of complicated to look at other outside sources. You probably then have to use case combination logics, which is also good, but it increases the complexity. So yeah, I do think that that's probably the main takeaway from that aspect of my thesis. And now I think I forgot what your second question was.
No, actually, it was just this.
Okay.
Just one question.
All right.
But maybe you have a brief follow-up question on that. How would you? I mean, you had a lot of recommendations now. What else could be done? How could this be done methodologically to combine this approach with an approach that does not look that much at text, but at other kinds of practices?
Well, it's true. So, in that case, of course, if you want to look at non-textual data and you do not want to analyze non-textual data once it has been textualized, you cannot use corpus linguistics. So you would then have to come up with different techniques of getting at social logics. I must say I've actually never thought about how to do that because I have a hard time thinking of any cases in which we do not at least partially also encounter textual data. But I do think that is a pretty a good aspect to think about, particularly in the context of questions of how material factors play into this. But that's a large and other ongoing discussion in discourse theory. I don't have a particularly good answer for that.
Yeah, maybe it's just food for thought for some type of research. Unless Jason or Ariadna, you have a very urgent question that we should discuss right now, I would close this public meeting and ask everyone to leave the room, not the two of you, but everyone